The Hmong had aided the CIA and American troops during the secret war in Laos. In exchange for helping the United States government in the war, the Hmong were promised help and protection. However, in 1975, the United States pulled out from the region after the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese soldiers had taken over. Failing to follow through with the promise allegedly made by the CIA, many Hmong were left behind to either flee to the jungles or journey on foot to Thailand. This is where our story begins. My father's story began on the night he just returned from the gardens, and my mother was taking care of my older sister, who was still a baby at the time. Out of nowhere, a man burst from the forest groves. He rushed in, out of breath, and fear was etched in his eyes. The man was a friend of my father and had traveled between Laos and Thailand numerous times. He quickly urged them to pack lightly and to follow him into the jungles to escape the pillaging communist soldiers. As my parents rushed into the jungle, they met with their friends, a newlywed couple, and several other people from the same village. At that moment, they realized that they had to leave their life in Laos behind, and everything else that they held dear. Dad remembers the stench of sweat and blood, especially the cries of those who were not fortunate enough to make it through the first night. The jungle terrain was harsh and rugged. Soldiers, famine, disease, and landmines. The possibilities of danger were endless. They ran as far as they could from the sound of gunfire. My father's group was dead quiet because of the fear of getting caught. Out of nowhere, my sister began to cry, breaking the eerie silence. Her cries could have alerted any soldiers lurking nearby. The only option left for survival was to sedate my sister with opium. Opium lures the baby easily to quiet slumber. Parents knew using the drug would bring risky consequences. Weeks had passed by, and the hopes my parents had of surviving were dwindling to zero. The initial number of the group was slowly diminishing, losing people to diseases, famine, and execution. In the recent days, even the rain was harsh. The group found shelter from the rain and wind inside a damp cave. Food had run out and starvation gradually crept in. In order to provide for everyone else, the men had to go out and scavenge for what food they could find. They knelt at the entrance of the cave, looking right and looking left, to see if there were any evidence of patrolling communist soldiers. After concluding that the area was safe, the men departed from the cave. The vicinity the group was currently in was a dangerous zone. Communist soldiers had swarmed the place, hiding in packs and lie waiting for their prey. My father and his friends had to be quick in their quest, yet the search for food was difficult. The only source of food available was a root from a tree that lies deeply buried in the ground. After successfully digging up the roots, they headed back for the cave, but along the way, misfortune struck. The sound of a gunfire had gone off, and my father's friend was suddenly shot. Fortunately, the soldier missed the vital spots. My father remembers picking up his friend by the shoulders and quickly running to hide deeper in the woods. During that time, my father helped his friend keep the wound as clean as possible with what little resources they had. They didn't want to go back to the cave for the fear that soldiers would follow them, and so they waited for nearly hours until they thought it was safe enough to go back. parents' group, and my dad's friend looked as though he had already succumbed to it. They moved as fast as they could towards the Mekong River, the only obstacle that separated them from Thailand. After hopeless weeks of traveling, the sudden roar of a river seemed like a safe haven away from execution. As they rushed towards freedom, they heard a slight sound moving towards them. Everyone stopped in their steps, and complete silence took over. Seconds felt like minutes, and minutes felt like hours. My mother, trying to quiet my older sister, forgot to carefully measure the amount of opium permissible to give to an infant. My sister, that I never knew, had already left this life for another. My father distinctively remembers the cry from that day, a chilling sound he wishes to forget, but will forever be etched into his memories. The agonizing cry of sorrow, which came at such a horrible cost, was what ultimately saved them. The pursuing soldiers, hearing such despair, were rattled to the bone. They fled, fearing whatever was making the sound would curse them. Seizing the bittersweet opportunity, my father's group quickly made their way to the edge of the Mekong River. The river was the final obstacle into Thailand, fast, swift, and unforgiving. After gathering bamboo trees as floating devices, the group saved their last ounce of strength to battle against the raging river. My father's friend, who was fortunate enough to survive a gunshot wound, had come to his doom. He collapsed onto the ground, coughing blood. The crossing of the river would be a risky endeavor for the young man. Since escape from persecution was so close at hand, the young man decided to make the perilous swim. Strapping themselves to their bamboo, they began the crossing. As if having a life of its own, the current fought against the group tirelessly. The guide, being the first to cross safely, made it across. My father and mother were the next two. Closely behind them was a young woman, moments away from safety. She looked back one last time, only to see that her husband was struggling. She swam back to help him. She grabbed onto his hand, but it was too late. The river had engulfed my father's friend and his wife. Months had passed since the escape to Thailand. The Hmong who had escaped thought they had arrived to a safe haven. However, the horrors weren't over yet. They were crammed into refugee camps. Diseases crept at every corner. Children became orphans, and elders were abandoned. While some wanted the citizenship of Thailand, others waited for admittance into America, but the process was long and exclusive. Only those with basic English skills or served in the war were allowed entrance into America. My parents studied English late into the night in hopes of coming to America. Early every morning, my father ran to the notification board, hoping to see his name on the list of those accepted into America. Months had gone by, and over again, his name never appeared. My parents slowly began to lose hope. It had been several months since my parents had last seen their guide. He came up to my father, shook his hand, and said he was there to deliver some news. My father stood motionless. My mother stopped sewing. It was done. My parents had survived the jungles of Laos, the persecution of the communist soldiers, and the tough conditions of encampment. This is my parents' story. This is our story, a story of loss, perseverance, and hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the United States of America. We'll be landing shortly. I hope you have enjoyed your flight with us. Thank you.